Yeah, good afternoon. This is me and Jay presenting our CIA3 for International, where we focus on the country China and we focus on the import and export of China, its trade policies, and also provide an emphasis on the trade war that it had with the US. Over to Jay.
To begin with, China has been a communist country with strong socialist foundations and has focused on the predominance of public ownership and state owned enterprises. Uh, but lately, in the last couple of decades, they have embedded a lot of free market ideologies by enhancing private participation in their economic activity. Uh, Through this, they have achieved the second largest economy in the world, the title of it, with a GDP of around $17.9 trillion, second only to the US. This economic growth has been derived from the service growth of the services sector and the booming industrial sector, where 52% and 39% of the GDP is contributed by these two sectors alone. And the industrial sector is driven by the mining, construction, and infrastructural projects. And China is also an export-oriented country with majority of their income coming from exports of such uh, services and products, along with a lot of private investment.
Looking at the international trade, where we focus on the exports and imports of the country, on the side of exports, China is the largest exporter of goods and services to the rest of the countries. Its exports were valued at $3.7 trillion, which is about 14% of the global exports. Thus, we can safely say that China dominates the global trade mainly due to its cheap labor force, tax incentives provided, while also ensuring high quality of goods. Now, contrast to belief, China also imports a lot. It imported about 2.7 trillion worth of goods and services. It mainly imports to meet its domestic production needs, agriculture, and industrial needs. And most of its products are on agricultural products, petroleum products, and iron ore. Now, looking at the history of international trade of China, it started in the 1970s, where China began its journey to become the trade powerhouse by reforming and opening up towards the global economy. During the 1990s, through advancement in transport logistics and emergence of global value chains, China was emerging to be a global partner in the manufacturers due to its scaling up of operations. In the 2000s, in 2001, China joined the World Trade Organization, which promoted GVCs and allowed China's ascension to drastically expand exports to the rest of the world. By 2010, China was regarded to be the king of manufactured exports to tapping the GVCs. Around this time is when the concerns regarding China's export policies began and led to tensions between China and the US and the European Union.
So, since we have been focusing a lot on Chinese exports, it is only right we talk about what they export and to whom they export. China has relied upon the demand from the major economies around the world, like the US, Europe, and the Asian nations, who want a lot of affordable products given by the Chinese. This can be attributed to the low cost, high quality goods and services that they provide, thanks to the cheap labor and excessive government support by the Chinese government. In 2021, the Chinese top export destination was the US. Ironically, the US, because they have a lot of disputes with the US in the last 5 years, and these exports are worth at around $530 billion, and they also export heavily to countries such as Japan, Vietnam, Australia, and Brazil. And what do they export? They The top three export categories are electrical machinery and electronics, which consists of broadcasting equipment, computers, integrated circuits, and smartphones. Uh, this sector constitutes about 28% of the total exports and is valued at $947 billion. And this second category is mechanical appliances and parts, and it is referred to the office machine parts, telephones, and other commercial equipments. And this sector constitutes to about 17% of all exports and can be valued at $594 billion. And the third major export sector is the plastics and plastic articles. They mainly consist of commercial and consumer goods made of plastic, and China is the largest exporter of plastic goods in the world with an exports valued at $130 billion.
Looking at the imports, the recent dependence of China on imports has raised a few concerns. These imports are mainly required to meet domestic consumption and industrial needs due to lack of resources. In 2022, as mentioned, imports of China were valued at $2.7 trillion. Now, these imports, the top imports was mineral fuels, oils, and products. These mainly consist of crude oil and other mineral fuels that are essential for the industrial sector to grow. These are valued at $326 billion. Next are ores, slags, and other mineral products. These refer to ores and minerals that China lacks, which are required for the growth of the industrial sector and also creation of finished goods. These constitute about 12% of the imports and are valued at $230 billion. Next is our electrical machinery and electronics. These refer to about integrated circuits and other important parts that act as intermediaries for the production of the final goods. These constitute about 15% and can be valued at $340 billion.
China has been focusing a lot on free trade lately, and free trade agreements are trade pacts between countries, the governments between the countries. There are intergovernmental deals which reduce the trade barriers between those countries' trade. This includes reduction in import tariffs and export excise duties, and removal of quotas if there exists any. The WTO was set up with this clear objective of removing obstacles in the global trade and creating an competitive and free trade environment. This has helped a lot of small countries to be part of the global trading system and have derived a lot of gains from the same. China has been part of the WTO since 2001, and it has been crucial for it becoming a global export success it has been today. And the various concerns have also been raised when it comes to China's trading policy after this, which includes the infringement of technical knowledge and the lack of compliance to WTO's rules. China has engaged with like around 23 free trade agreements, primarily with the Asian nations, Australia and South Korea. And there are many more FTAs that are under negotiation with the Middle Eastern nations. Uh, these FTAs would propel Chinese to further expand their export dominance in the world. So let's focus on the trade war that happened between the US and China in 2018. So both US and China have been in a ideological dispute since the beginning, as US prefers more of a free market economy, while the Chinese economy has been a communist nation. And the US has started blaming for the Chinese uh, due to its rising unemployment and the domestic businesses being hurt, as they feel Chinese government involves excessively by providing a lot of uh, special economic zones, huge lands and tax concessions, and cheaper labor to attract foreign businesses, as well as give a unfair competitive edge to the Chinese manufacturing companies in China, which has led to a drastic decline in the cost of production, where the countries like US and developed economies are not able to give such similar pricing. And Chinese also have been accused of manipulating the exchange rate by intentionally devaluing the yuan against dollar to keep. So let's focus on the events that transpired from July 6, 2018. When Donald Trump came into power, he imposed tariffs on $34 billion worth of goods and services imported from China at about 25%. And China retaliated with a similar increase in tariffs. And on August 23rd, 2018, a further of $16 billion worth of goods were imposed a 25% tariff by the United States, and China retaliated likewise. And in September 24, 2018, the US took a bigger move, and $200 billion worth of Chinese imports were tariffed at 10%, and this was further again increased to 25% in 2019 Jan. Uh, so we can clearly see that the US has been on an offensive, and China has replied to it with a similar impetus. And 5 to 10% of tariff hikes were imposed on US imports worth $60 billion. So who won and who lost in this trade war, right? When it comes to international trade, without the free market mechanism, when governments start intervening in the prices, both the parties lose. But in this case, the United States has lost more than the Chinese. Given that Chinese has always been an export dominant economy, the US thought it would hurt China if the tariffs were imposed. However, the truth is that the United States were dependent on the Chinese imports more than the Chinese were dependent on the US for its exports. A tariff is essentially a tax on the buyer, in this case, an average American consumer, and it disrupts the price mechanism by artificially increasing the price of goods and services which were otherwise available cheaply. So this creates a dead weight loss, and the American industries also suffered as their raw materials, which were again imported from China, are now costlier than before, and this has led to increased input cost, which has driven up prices and results in inflation. And immediately after the few weeks of the tariffs were imposed, US inflation also skyrocketed. And in the long run, the US economy lost around 245,000 US jobs, and there were this effect defeated the purpose of imposing trade restrictions in the first place. Companies like Ford prepared for layoffs as they reported that tariffs had cost them $1 billion, and many other companies shut down their production units and cut jobs due to slowing sales and increased input costs. And many businesses choked during the course of the trade war.
Move on to the next slide. So thus we can see that China has gained ascension toward being the global leader of exports of various types of goods. This has also affected major economies across the world, such as the US, EU, and Australia. However, this trend is set to continue in the near future as China plans to rely more on domestic demand and its share of imports is set to increase drastically. This could provide opportunities to growing economies such as India to take over and become a global leader in the exports. Thank you.
The China
So thus this concludes our presentation on the China's trading policies, trade analysis, and also the trade war. This has been presented by me and Jay Ganesh. Thank you very much.